Welcome back to the Poultry Doc Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Blayne Mozisek. Each week, we bring you board-certified veterinary guidance to help your flock thrive. Let's head to the coop. Hey, I'm Dr. Blayne Mozisek. Welcome back to the Poultry Doc Podcast. Today, I want to share a few details about screwworms, specifically the New World screwworm, which I'm sure many of you have heard about recently, and its introduction or reintroduction back into the United States, specifically into South Texas. So a little bit of back history about the New World screwworm. It actually devastated the U.S. throughout, like up until the 1960s, when an eradication program began that really pushed it outside the state. So one of the last places it was removed from was in Florida, actually. And then since then, USDA, in combination with other regulatory agencies in Central America, have really pushed it all the way back through Mexico and into Panama. And it really remained a barrier there to prevent that screwworm from getting past what was considered like a biological free zone, right, at the Isthmus of Panama. So the USDA, and again with Panamanian authorities over the last several decades, have maintained an extensive operation dropping hundreds of millions of sterile flies, really a week in many cases, to prevent that worm from spreading further north. So a little back history. 2 US scientists came up with a theory on how they could eliminate the screwworm, and they basically sterilized male flies, and they proved it on the island of Curaçao, where over the course of about 6 months, and by releasing hundreds of millions of sterile flies, they were actually able to completely eliminate this population of New World screwworm on the island of Curaçao. After proving it there, they then moved into the US, and that eradication program began and took several years, eventually pushing it actually all the way back to the Isthmus of Panama, where since then the USDA and Panamanian authorities have worked vigorously to maintain this biological free zone, basically releasing hundreds of millions of flies really weekly in order to prevent that fly from moving northward. So several years ago, you got to think about how migration and people movement has increased rapidly over the last couple of years. That fly was able to evade or overcome that biological buffer zone, and since over the last several years has been spreading northward into Mexico. It's been followed very closely by USDA, Texas Animal Health Commission being really on top of it as well, following its migration or movement up through central Mexico, and now finally across the border in the state of Texas. So to date, which today is June 8th, to my knowledge, there's been 2 cases in Zavala County, both in calves. So basically the worm was found in the umbilicus of those 2 calves. So what makes New World screwworm unique is that its maggots, or the larvae of this fly, actually eat living tissue. That's the big distinction between it and your common blowfly that you may find, dead animals or carrion. Those common blowflies eat dead tissue. The New World screwworm larva actually eats living tissue. So it produces these proteases and actually digests living tissue. Obviously, that's not a good thing, and actually animals can succumb to it. So after its detection in South Texas, there has been more increased rapid response to the screwworm. We've got one facility that was completed last year that can produce, I think, up to about 300 million flies a week. There's another one even larger in the process of being completed as we speak now. And so the response has been somewhat overwhelming. The main goal right now is to try to prevent the northward migration of that fly into the United States. And USDA, Texas Animal Health Commission, and other regulatory authorities are doing everything they can to prevent its spread. So we don't want to be alarmist, but if we've got pets or livestock, it's always important to look at any sort of open wounds that they may have. We want to make sure that there's no potential for this insect, this parasite really, to invade those wounds. So if we can avoid any sort of elective surgeries that would potentially cause an open wound, we can avoid those. Again, we just want to make sure that any sort of wounds that we have, that we monitor those closely and make sure that those flies aren't laying eggs in them. I've seen and read a lot of misinformation being spread online that this fly is everywhere. That is not the case. It has been actively and aggressively monitored as it's made its way through Mexico. This has been known to be coming, and the authorities have had a really close eye on it. As being a veterinarian in this area, really close to the cattle industry growing up, it's one thing that I've really watched closely make its way through Mexico and finally now into the US. And I can tell you that everything is being done in order to control it. So really, it's those along the southern Texas border that should be concerned, or at least aware of what this is, and watch for it going on. Now, if you do see any signs of what we call myiasis, or actually a potential that you may think is a case of New World screwworm, it's important to report that. So you want to call your local veterinarian or your potential Texas Animal Health Commission and report that as a case of potential New World screwworm. They'll come out and make an assessment. Now, this can be treated, right? There are products that we have on the market that can treat it, so this is not one of those cases where your animals are going to be depopulated or taken from you. There are plenty of treatments available, and we can get them over it. The Texas Animal Health Commission, and again, USDA just want to identify if it actually is a true case, because that allows them to implement the control strategies, releasing those sterile flies to prevent further spread. So I encourage you, if you do think you have one of these cases, to call Texas Animal Health Commission or your local public animal health authority and report the case. So if you do find a lesion or a wound on an animal that you feel may potentially be New World screwworm, it's important to try not to remove those maggots. Again, call your local authorities, inform them. They will quickly come out, I promise you. They will identify what it is, and then there are specific treatments that we can give those animals to kill those parasites off. But actually, we don't want to get in there and try to disrupt them, because if you try to remove them and break them apart, that can actually, that reaction of that broken apart insect in that wound can cause more harm than good. So always best to call a veterinarian or your local animal health authorities, in this case, Texas Animal Health Commission, and report that possible case. And one last thing, if you're interested and you want to know more, I know we covered it really quickly, but I've got an in-depth article that I wrote about the New World screwworm, the history of how it was eradicated from the US, and how it was maintained in that Isthmus of Panama until recently, and its progression forward, and how USDA and other regulatory authorities are handling it in their response. So check out thepoultrydoc.com, go to the Learn section, and you'll see the article for the New World screwworm.